Her Story is one of those games which are barely a game at all. My first issue was with the fact that it's not even in 1080p. Supposedly the game takes place in 1994 and thus you are using a CRT monitor and the game's looks are overall retro. That still doesn't justify the fact that the game doesn't offer proper full HD resolutions, let alone any ultra wide ones. You can still create a retro feeling in modern aspect ratios, it doesn't have to be at a lower resolution, so I don't really see what the point of this is. The minimal gameplay presented here involves you checking a police database with recorded interviews of a person who is a murder suspect. The whole gameplay revolves around watching clips and figuring out keywords which you can use to find more clips in the database. It sounds quite boring on paper, but it actually works to some extent. There are a total of 271 clips and you get a special database description which shows you how many you have discovered and where exactly the one that you are currently watching fits into the whole, length of the videos. The actual clips are recorded with only one actress and in relatively poor quality. At least what is good about this whole concept is that the actress they chose is quite good at acting, and through her acting she will actually pose some important questions about the story she's telling. Obviously I can't go into details here because that would spoil some of the more interesting parts of the whole mystery. The way you watch a seemingly random clip and hear a name mentioned, then enter that name as a keyword into the search bar and find more random clips was somehow reminiscent of an old adventure game where you have to write the commands by hand. You know, if you wanted to check something, you would have to write check vase, for example. Naturally, it's much better here than in those old days because it's all far less confusing and a lot more intuitive. Still, it does feel like a weird concept for a game. I started off looking at it and suspecting that I would lose my interest very quickly, but was luckily wrong. The game began getting boring after about 2 hours of this, and that's exactly when it actually ended. So you see, you don't have to discover all 271 clips in order to figure out what happened, and especially in order for the game to suddenly offer you its ending and big revelations. You only need some of the more important key clips. You'll know you've hit an important one by the way your screen will tear for a second and you will hear a static. It's very subtle, but you won't miss it. One thing that bothered me is that you have only one actress and she will answer questions which you won't even hear. They could have had any normal non-actor play a policeman who's questioning her. Obviously, you don't need a good voice actor or even an actor at all to ask these mundane and pretty typical questions you expect to hear in a murder investigation. You could have just taken anyone. Hell, it could have been any random developer who would just say the questions into the microphone. Things such as, what is your name? How old are you? Where were you on the night of the murder? Stuff like that. No, they opted for basically the actress just staying quietly and making a face like she's trying to hear a question or she's concentrating on it and then just answering it, but the question never comes. Obviously the player can deduce what the question is, because if she says, for example, I'm 32 years old or I was at home watching TV that night, you can pretty much understand what the question was about, but I feel like this was not something that they needed to save on. I also feel like the game would have gained a lot if the player had the possibility to ask some questions instead of simply watching these clips. Right now you're just an observer and not an investigator in any way. This is obviously by design, but still it's a missed opportunity. It feels dull. You get to do a very simple task repetitively and it just feels like, while it did manage to hold my interest for a short while, maybe some players won't even grant it that much. In addition to all of that, playing the game will require you to prepare a pen and paper in order to write some of the information you get down. The clips are all mixed up, so you need to write down names, locations, and other things you will hear in order to be able to figure things out and not forget some of the facts. Apparently some players really enjoyed that aspect of the game, but it does make for a confusing story with very little to keep your attention. If you only follow leads from the videos you watch, you might actually progress a bit slower than I did. However, I tried some keywords which would be logical when it comes to a murder investigation, and I pretty much hit gold early on. So I knew most of what was happening, or rather what had happened, within the first few minutes of the game. The rest was just adding more details. Interestingly enough, it turns out that the murder is not the main mystery of the game. There is another subplot which is much harder to be sure of and has left people on forums discussing for days. It's interesting, I won't lie to you, but does it make for a good story? No, it's still bland and mostly boring, but it is a very important part of the story, which does make it better, but still not good. Had the plot not thickened and shown me that there is more than just a murder, I would have probably lost any interest within the first 15 minutes of playing. While the game did manage to hold my attention for those 2 hours that I played it, it did so by the skin of its teeth. A lot of people seem to like this game, but I don't really see why after having played it. You could just watch the clips on YouTube in the correct order. You'd have a more coherent story and pay nothing for that pleasure. The gameplay is so minimalistic that I honestly don't think it's even enough to really call this a game. When you consider the fact that it costs €8 on both GOG and Steam, I'd say that it's definitely not worth it. The only thing it really did for me is make me want to play LA Noire again. Now that's a good investigation game with some proper gameplay. So yeah, should you play this? Well, honestly, I don't think you should. It really isn't good enough to merit $8. I'd argue that it's not even good enough if you had to pay half of that price. You'd be better off just watching the clips on YouTube. There are compilations in the correct order, so it's made very easy for you. You could experience the story and you'd pretty much miss nothing from the game because everything there is else is just typing in one word at a time. It's not exciting. I'm shocked to realize that this is probably one of my shortest reviews of a game, but unfortunately there isn't much to say here. Not unless I want to spoil it completely, and I'm not gonna do that. So I guess this is where I want to thank you for watching my video and wish you a great day. I hope to see you on the next one. This is Nino signing off.